Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Foodbuy Futures Live event. I'm Carl Atkins, Chief Operating Officer at Foodbuy, and I'm really pleased to host this first live discussion. Foodbuy Futures is all about bringing industry experts together to discuss key industry topics right now. And our topic for today couldn't be more pertinent, is about PPE and returning to business in a safe way for employees and customers. So I'm delighted to be joined by a superb panel today. So we have Craig Campbell, Supply Chain and Procurement Director for Compass Group Asia Pacific. We have Leanne Faulkner, Senior Account Manager from Bunzl Catering Supplies. Robin Maxwell, Sales Director from Bunzl Catering Supplies. Sean Ross, Head of Global Safety and Security for Costa. Catherine Pegner, Managing Director for GB Health. And Neil Chapman, Category Director, Services, Equipment and Supplies at Foodbuy. So thank you to everyone who's tuning in to be with us. The discussion will probably last about 45 minutes and we will be posting the video out after the session. So I'm going to hand over to Neil Chapman now just to set the scene from a supply perspective around PPE, and from there we'll build the discussion. So over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Carl, and good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the last few weeks and months. And it goes without saying, I don't really need to set the scene much. I think everyone's aware of some of the significant challenges we've had in this category and in the market. And a lot of that is just driven by unprecedented demand across PPE, both for our clients, but also across the UK and worldwide. And that goes without saying. And that inevitably has put product availability and our supply chains under significant pressure. And I guess what you've seen in the market is lots of UK businesses pivoting into this category and into this market. And we've seen coffee companies moving to selling surgical gowns to the NHS. Every business type you can imagine moving into the self-production of hand sanitizer or the reselling of it, as those things become the hottest commodities of the moment. And you know, that can come with its own risks, whether that be accredited or with the appropriate accreditation. So lots of things going on that have put further strain on existing product availability through those normal channels. Manufacturers ultimately have been, and understandably have been, prioritising NHS and frontline workers, as you'd expect. And you have heard firsthand how the UK government have had challenges themselves in terms of getting product across borders from Europe and Asia, and actually getting product specifications and costs right. So it's a challenge that everybody's seen firsthand. And we've heard, you know, stories of product being sold at the airport for a higher price whilst on its way to its original customer, and all of these kind of crazy things becoming the new norm. And I was on a webinar recently where somebody shared an acronym that I wanted to share very briefly, which is VUCA, which is something the US Army uses as a term, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I share that just because I think it's a great reflection of probably COVID-19 for most of us, and a great way of summing up probably PPE over the last few months. But I guess I wanted to look to the future and the positive to say that actually market is stabilising. We're certainly through the worst of this, and supply chains are adapting and catching up to what I guess we now call the new normal. And we've got clients that are either recently opened or reopening, or who are optimizing existing business that's continued to trade throughout. And health and safety now is undoubtedly the #1 priority. And hopefully from today and from some of this session, you'll get some great insight in terms of the here and now, but also beyond, as we look to continue to build consumer confidence and equip our clients with the appropriate tools to meet these new needs. So that's me, Carl. Over to you.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks. A really good scene setting, I think, in terms of the current landscape. So I think now media coverage daily about the return to normal for the hospitality industry, lots of different coverage about when that will happen, but certainly plans underway across all of our industry to reopen. And that's bringing big challenges for operators in how we do that safely, but also bring a great guest experience. So if I could go over to Robin now, just to talk through and give your perspective on, the types of PPE that businesses should be thinking about as they reopen in the hospitality industry, Robin.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, so I think that for me the most critical element really, and the consistent piece is personal hygiene is the real starter, and that's in terms of good washing of hands, hand sanitizer, use of hand towels as the core basics throughout. Now, hospitality comes in multiple formats, and therefore there's no one size fits all solution, I would suggest. The critical bit is obviously safety of our people and our guests and customers, as well as helping to drive confidence and bringing these people back to work with us. So the key bits again, back of house, things like masks, gloves, visors, will all be critical elements, as well as front of house, similar piece alongside good signage, and making sure that it's clear to your staff, as well as the people coming to use your restaurant or whatever it may be, that you have really managed through with the appropriate risk assessments and covered all aspects of safety for them and for your employees. I think the challenge, of course, in our hospitality arena, and I think we'll touch on it a little bit later, is using a face mask and then trying to greet somebody coming into your building are kind of two contradictory things. So I think all these elements need to be considered, and ultimately as well, the safe use of PPE is a critical part of this. So while we can recommend people using a face mask or gloves, that may not be, if they don't, it may be more dangerous if they don't use it in a safe fashion. And I think that understanding how to use these products is as important as what to use. So yeah.
And are you seeing anything, Robin, from your customer group about how they're redesigning the space to ensure it's safe? Are you seeing any good examples of best practice? Are you being lent on to provide insight and guidance to the trade?
Yeah, so across the division, obviously we've got our design business, and they have been working very hard around using perspex and innovative ideas around how to provide that safety while not impacting too much on the visuals of any properties. Safety as well, I think, in terms of just the flow of traffic through a building, ensuring that as much as possible it's a one-way flow, like we're all experiencing in supermarkets, etc. At the minute, and just really thinking through the area that you've got and the building that you've got and how you can maximize it. Touchless offerings, obviously, as much as possible as well, in terms of that's even right down to, we've looked at some concepts around waiters, instead of using a waiter, you may use a touchless iPad to order your food at your table, as an example. So I think it's just really thinking about what are the risk areas within your operation, and minimizing touch points, ensuring that equipment is cleaned and sanitized, and ideally only used by one person in a day, or if it's shared, that it's clean between use, and just really considering what happens in your individual operation that could be a risk to your customers and employees.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you, Robin. And there's obviously different remobilisation phases happening across the globe, and a lot of coverage about what's happening in Asia, given that they're at the different part of the journey of reopening and very much leading that. So going over to Sean now. Sean, are you able to share some of your experiences of reopening of Costa in China, and what perspectives you can bring from that experience?
Yes, certainly. I think other than the sort of obvious requirement of complying with the government requirements or restrictions. The main area and challenge is around the consideration of what other measures you may need to put in place, particularly where there's no definitive guidance or where the guidance might actually be contradictory or subject to various different people's opinion on what is the correct or right thing to do. The other thing to overlay it with is it's not necessarily just about safety compliance in the traditional sense, but also taking into account team members' concerns, customers' confidence and their perception of safety rather than sort of, safety from a legislative compliance point of view. So that's something probably there's been much more emphasis on than traditionally within the health and safety industry. The other thing from a team member point of view, obviously with the sort of situation we find ourselves in now, is it's not just concerning ourselves with their physical safety, but also their mental well-being as they go through lockdown or have concerns about their health, childcare, etc. So there's a whole package of measures in place around supporting our team members to get through the crisis. So in terms of what we've sort of seen in introducing our stores within China, as you'd expect, there's a fair range of social distancing measures in place. For example, a contactless collection point, so to remove or reduce the sort of close interaction between team members and customers. Initially offering a takeaway service only with no dine-in, which was a government requirement, much like the situation we're currently in within the UK. Increased frequency of hand washing, sanitising of touch points and the like. So again, all the normal things that we're experiencing and doing day to day here now as well. And then in China, we had the situation of the provision of face masks being mandatory, and also the sort of conducting temperature checks on customers when they came to the premises. So we're now in a position where we have 98% of our stores in China have reopened. Our sort of traffic is about 70% of what it was previously, and we're now monitoring sort of changes in sort of customers' behaviour in terms of different sort of visit patterns, so visiting at different times of the day in terms of when they normally would have, obviously as a result of the situation that they found themselves in, and whether they are sort of new ways and new habits at stake or whether they will revert to normal in time obviously needs to be remains to be seen.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really encouraging. Some of those metrics you talk about at the end, one getting 98% stores open, I think is a fantastic achievement so far. But seeing 70% of traffic already, I think that should give us confidence that if we can redesign, implement the measures that you've spoken about, that consumers will return and are happy to do so. So I think that's a really exciting proof point for us actually in the UK at the moment. So thank you for sharing those experiences. Really insightful. Craig, I wonder if you could just share, Compass's Asia Pacific business, your experience of having to manage all of the supply of PPI, meeting client requirements across the region, very diverse region. So we're very much interested in your perspectives on how that's happening and how that's been going for you.
Yeah, thank you, and some great points there from Sean around what's obviously happening in Costa, and I think that's very much reflective across our business and the 10 countries that we operate in across Asia Pacific. Very much our experience across the region has really, with PP, very much dependent on each government's response and each sector of the business and how it really, the cultural aspects of that come into play. When it comes to the supply chain, China, we were really at the heart of where all of the PPE came from originally in the first place. We may see that change as governments change their perspective on China going forward, but very much 60% of the world's PPE came out of China. So we were very well positioned within the region to take advantage of that as a business. We already experienced a lot of these products were already in our SKU list, which was probably not the case for a lot of other countries. It was very cultural, normal to wear a mask within a lot of the countries across Asia, Japan, Singapore, China. It was very much an aspect that hasn't changed for us. So we're very much ahead of the game in terms of that. What has changed, and I think we hear a lot of stories and not so good ones about the PPE coming out of China. Our advice very much to our own teams has been, we all have stories around the costs. Very much we see inflated costs, but that's not always been the case of what's been happening on the ground. I think it's realistically a demand led in terms of our expectations of lead times and whether you've had the ability or the latitude to be able to take that by land, air or sea, which has really led to the differential in costs. What we have seen and what we very strongly advise is that you stick to the reputable suppliers coming out of China and anywhere across Asia Pacific, mainly because we've seen a lot of the textile businesses switch over into producing PPE, and unfortunately they don't have the experience, and a lot of that product has been held up at ports and adding a more lead time into your product as well. So that's really what we've seen. The cultural differences, the supply chain is very much holding up, and hopefully will do more so in the future as Asia gets back to normal. And what we heard there from Sean is definitely Costa is getting back to normal, as are most of our businesses across Asia as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Craig. And are you seeing now that the supply is less volatile? Is it very much normalising in that region, and that should give us some confidence?
Yeah, very much so. I think the factories are now all back to work, but because it was always the case where the factories were mandatory taken over by the government and not necessarily able to produce as much stock as they were previously due to their own illness, etc., and wanting to protect and use that stock for their own people and their own frontline staff. As that demand has fallen away, product very much is available, and I would even say that price is coming down slightly.
Okay, that's good. Good to hear. Thank you. Thanks for sharing those perspectives, Craig. Really interesting. So if we bring that back to the UK now, I think some really interesting lessons and insights from a part of the world that's already through that reopening journey. Going to Leanne, I've heard some great insight from Sean and Craig. How's Bunzl translating those lessons into the UK market? I think you're on mute actually, Leanne.
How's that? I think if we've learned anything over the past 3 months, it's basically been that this landscape will continue to change. You know, product requirements will change based on feedback or legislation. Demand will undoubtedly change, and we know that that's been one of our biggest challenges. And to ensure we continue success, we must continue to do what we've been doing, which is basically review, react and adapt accordingly to those changes. I can only talk from a Compass and Foodbuy perspective, but I believe, and I hope Neil agrees, that this has been our strength over the past 3 months, and we must continue to do that. Our space is very difficult because within the hospitality sector there is no one solution that fits all, but ultimately our priority is to ensure our clients and their employees feel confident in our ability to provide them with the correct materials and equipment to feel safe in their workplace.
Yeah. And how are you finding the supply and demand at the moment? Are you seeing that normalise, or is it still volatile?
I think it depends on the products that we're talking about. So if we look at where we were, you know, at the beginning 3 months ago, it was very much about sanitizer, and the demand was just completely outstripping supply. And you saw, I think Craig mentioned, you see, or Neil mentioned at the beginning, you know, everyone is starting to produce sanitizer, and the quality of that sanitizer may not be something that we would choose to provide ourselves. And then as you go further into the past 3 months, where we are now, we see shortage on things like gloves and aprons and those sort of areas, really. And I think we are really fortunate in what we have in our Shanghai resource from a sourcing and auditing perspective, that any product that we do bring in, then we're comfortable with the quality of that, and it will meet the legislations required. So I think yeah, it's varied, Carl, over the past 3 months. Basically, there have been sort of hot products at the beginning, and those hot products have changed throughout.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Sean, how's the cost experience in China coming across into the UK? you see any adaptations of what you're having to do in that region, or is it fairly similar?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. I think, first of all, we have everything we do is underpinned by sort of the 4 key principles of, if a team member has COVID symptoms, to stay at home and self-isolate, regular hand washing, sanitising touch points frequently, and the social distancing measures. And those things are pretty much the same the world over, albeit you might have a debate as to whether it's 1 metre or 2 metres that's the minimum required for social distancing. So I think in terms of lessons from China, it was more a useful indicator of the potential shape of things to come, albeit we were mindful that it is unlikely that the UK government would do exactly the same as what was done in China. So, for example, lockdown would likely not be the same, and it looked unlikely that they would move to a position of mandating face masks, although we're obviously watching in case that situation changed at any point. The things that are in common with China are the things that I referred to earlier in terms of the people's perception of safety, team member and customer confidence in coming to our stores, coming back to work. So, for example, in the situation with masks, would a team member feel more comfortable coming back to work if they were provided with a face mask? Setting aside the cultural differences, clearly in terms of wearing sort of a face mask in China is perhaps more commonplace pre-COVID than what it would be within the UK. And then issues around the World Health Organization, when they were apparently going to review their position on face masks, would that suddenly lead to a change in position that meant we were now in the scramble for face masks, facing those same sort of supply chain issues that have been encountered sort of globally? So I think that's the main areas around where there were similarities with China, but bearing in mind the things that were likely to be different. In terms of the UK, what that translated into is a number of social distancing measures, some of which, as was mentioned earlier, are familiar with what was in place, introduced in the supermarkets who've remained open. And again, from that point of view, customers are probably used to seeing those things and no doubt partly at least expecting you to have those things in place. So we have queue management systems, customer signage, floor vinyls marking out safe queuing areas. We've got an innovative extendable shelf we've introduced to our drive-through windows that allows product to be passed from the team member out to the customer's car without the team member needing to lean out of the window. Screens around till points at counters and the like. Sanitising stations for customers that enter into the stores. So there's the sort of measures that you would expect to see in place. And as I said, in most of those, it's overlaying that piece around what decisions you're making based on where there isn't actually any definitive guidance, which our initial position on masks was for the reasons said about team member sentiment, like we made them available as a mandatory item. But since a couple of weeks ago, when the government published the sector-specific guidance, given a bit more clarity around masks and face coverings, we've moved to a position of them now being optional, albeit we are still providing them for the team members who choose to wear them. So it's obviously a movable feast, and things change every day, and it's just about trying to keep on top of it.
Yeah, no, I think some really exciting innovation happening at Costa, actually. Really good lessons learned. Thank you for sharing that. I'm looking forward to my first flat white soon, so she'll install. And on that point, this whole thing about guest experience, our industry, the hospitality industry, built off fantastic experiences. We want better experiences out of home than we do at home, and that's why we go out. And obviously nervousness about PPE and redesigning spaces, and how businesses can continue to deliver a great guest experience. So I guess on that theme, Leanne, looking to that topic, how can businesses make the most of PPE and other non-food items to continue to deliver a great experience and for that to be more seamless and part of the offer?
I think first and foremost, our key role is to drive confidence in the employee, which ultimately in turn will provide the consumer with confidence. You know, if the colleague feels safe in their workplace, they'll be able to focus on the consumer and their experience. Secondly, it's about the consumer feeling safe in that outlet as well, and this is a lot to do with perception, you know, but that is what it is. So from a consumer perspective, we believe that a lot of what Sean said basically, but we believe they'll want to see employees wearing face masks, whether they be the clinical blue ones that we're all familiar with, whether they are branded to make them look less clinical, whether they are clear so that the guest can see more than just someone's eyes or even visors, and that will be dependent on whether you're back of house or front of house. I think the consumers will want to see plenty of signage within the stores and the units, so floor markings to manage flow. If there isn't enough, or if space is tight within the unit, then they'd be looking to see or looking for dividers, perspex dividers. Probably stating the obvious, but they want to go in and see an environment that's absolutely spotless. They want to see plenty of sanitizer, like the stations you mentioned, Sean, or wipes that are readily available to use. In terms of the offer itself, I mean, I think that will absolutely have to be adapted, and we'll be looking to have a lot more touch-free options. And I think Robin might talk about that a bit later. And then with regards to specific products that the consumers will touch, so within our space, they want to know that those items are clean and hygienic, or at least feel that they are. So we're looking at things like individually wrapped cutlery packs. We've seen a huge spike in demand for them. Even things like individually wrapped straws, stirrers, napkins, wipes. The list could go on, and ultimately the extent of it will be a balance between commercials and consumer feedback. And I think that area in particular is an area that we need to stay really close to. And as I mentioned earlier, just constantly review, react and adapt accordingly.
Thanks, Leanne. And are you seeing increasing demand from businesses to have branded PPE and personalised PPE to that business or that brand? Or was that an emerging thing?
I think Robin will be able to touch on that a bit more. Specifically, my experiences are with Foodbuy and Compass, so not really in our space. But Robin, I don't know if you've maybe had some experiences within the high street.
I think it has been an area that has been looked at this point, I think, because nobody is quite aware of what, how long will PPE be around for? Is there a need? Again, the confidence around, is that product, if it's a reusable product, is it as clean and hygienic as a disposable product? But I think so. It's unclear at the minute. It's certainly of interest, and I think brand is important to many of us and many of our customers, and so it is a consideration, but equally against the backdrop of it does reduce the opportunity, as Leanne says, to adapt to circumstances. And I think agility and adaptation has been something that's really been critical through this process. So our world is a mass world of a mass number of SKUs, and I think what's become really loud and clear through this phase is where availability has become a challenge. We might not have had 100 ml hand sanitizer. Well, 500 mils will be great, and actually there was stages where 5 litre containers were what we were using with Pelican pumps, because certain elements of a 500 ml hand sanitizer were not available to source. So I think adaptation to and kind of a rethinking of how we look at things, and the fact that the product is required, the pack size may not be as critical as we all think of at times. So really just understanding what the need is at the bottom line, and whether you like it in a pack of 10 or a pack of 100 may not be as critical as we think.
Yeah.
And I think.
Sorry, Leanne, go on.
I think just on that, all of us as distributors or manufacturers or clients here, it's been our approach to things like that. So we're all now more flexible on things. We are open to ideas that we perhaps would not have been 6 months ago. So a certain brand of sanitizer, Robin, or size, or certain brand of wipe, we would have dismissed other alternatives pre-COVID, but now we're all more open to this idea of flexibility, and I think that can only benefit us all.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that flexibility and collaboration across all of the different parts of the supply chain has been loud and clear over the past few months, definitely. And just finishing on that, the kind of guest experience theme, I'm interested, Craig, in the experiences again in Asia Pacific for Compass. We've already said that the use of face masks, etc., in a hospitality environment is not as is more commonplace, so maybe not as a big shift. But what are some of the other things that are happening in Compass Asia Pacific to continue that great guest experience?
Yeah, I think you're right, and the example of Asia Pacific is it's such a broad brush stroke when we have countries as diverse as Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, etc. within the region. But it's very interesting to take a look back and look at the different countries and the way they approach things. It's very much from a Chinese perspective, and what we consider to be the Asian countries, their perspective is very much a barrier approach, whereas maybe Australia and New Zealand's approach is very much work with the chemical companies, let's not use face masks front of house, etc., and to try and prevent that from the customer seeing that. So it's one or two different ways it can go, but it also very much depends on the legislation within each of those countries as well, so we see how it goes. But we are working very closely with a number of our great suppliers, with Intertek as an auditor, to audit some of these firms, to give a strong presence and peace of mind to the client that it's a safe environment to go back into. And that's very much a confidence from our perspective to work with companies like Diversity, companies like Ecolab, to use very specific chemicals in a very specific way, and working with the clients to get these businesses reopened for the good of all of us. And it's also giving them a new food offer, so they're excited to get back into the workplace canteens, etc. as well, which is very much a step that we're looking at across Asia as well. So it's not just a barrier approach, it's an enticement approach as well.
I think that's a great way of putting it, Craig. Actually, barrier enticement. We've got a role to make people feel welcome and continue to have a great experience as they come back into establishments. So that's a really good point for the audience to think about. So I guess our last theme is, this has been very much about here and now, what we're seeing, some trends coming from another region in the world. I guess the future of PPE and innovation. Robin, specifically on innovation, is there anything in the pipeline that you see coming down the line that we should, you want to share, or any types of equipment innovation that you're thinking about that would be relevant for the UK industry?
I think it was touched on earlier a little bit, and one of the elements that we have been exploring and discussing with one of our suppliers is around the temperature checks and kind of, having a visibility of that as people enter buildings, whether that's in offices or restaurants, whatever it may be. And there's some quite innovative touch-free temperature check opportunities and kind of innovations that are coming through at the minute. And I guess, they're quite an interesting piece, and they're also quite accurate, because I think, again, I know there's some thermometers out there that you could buy that ultimately the accuracy may not deliver the need that you're trying to deliver on. In terms of then PPE, specifically, and the sustainability was something that was kind of front and center of every conversation that we had up until about mid-February or early March, and so that hasn't gone away from our thinking. And we were always very much of a, not all plastic is bad plastic, but it's about how it is managed and how it is the end of life solution really around that. And so the same thinking remains for us in terms of how do we manage these products, and how do we give the best end of life or new life solution to these products. Can be somewhat challenging, clearly, whenever you're dealing with potentially contaminated products, and therefore, to repeat the message of understand that, plastic has a place. It's got plenty of places where it shouldn't be, for example, in our oceans, but kind of safe management of it is sometimes a good thing. So it's just trying to, working through what are the options, what are the elements that we could look at within that. And then just more around, I think, really, Carl, parking PPE for a second, but really the creative ways of working and creative ideas around, increasing touchless, reducing, whether that's a touchless door, touchless toilet doors, things that we are not directly involved in, but ultimately you know, our goal is like everybody probably involved in this conversation is to get hospitality back up and running to as maximum capacity as possible. It's what many of us have been involved in for many years, and we all love. So, you know, the critical thing is how do we get back to work and back to operation and help our customers back to running their businesses. So that's our focus, and it's kind of a lot of thought around, you know, in a way, if PPE was kind of not here, that probably is a good sign in a sense, you know, and that means we're back to full normality. I think, you know, hand sanitizer, good washing of hands, good hygiene, you know, that message really needs to be driven home through this process. And I think, you know, I experienced with swine flu when that happened the last time, and we were inundated with hand sanitizer demand. At the end of that, we had to write off a container load of alcohol hand gel, which went out of date because it got forgotten again, you know, and it's not a habit in the UK. So I think if there was one element that kind of really should remain, that is one thing that could really help us all. Thanks,
Robin. And you touched on the sustainability point, which I think is absolutely key. It's increasingly more and more coverage around that, particularly PPE and other areas. I just wonder, before we do some closing thoughts, to Sean and Craig, that issue of sustainability with PPE, etc. Is that something you see quite prevalent in the Asia region in China, or is it less of an issue around how that PPE is reused or recycled or disposed of, etc.? Have you got any experiences around that?
I think Robin's kind of hit the nail on the head with regards to sustainability. It has unfortunately taken a back seat, and we need to use product in a different way and in a cleverer way. And hopefully there'll be some new innovations and great products to market that will help us along the sustainability route. One of the things that always comes out of a crisis is innovation. I was speaking with somebody recently, and we were looking at being able to do 1,500 litre containers of hand sanitizer and be able to fly them, whereas previously that has not always been the case. So there's always innovation that comes out of this, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of that, and it will drive sustainability forward rather than backwards. But the Asia Pacific region is not as front and centre on sustainability as some of the Western countries already. We are playing catch up at the moment.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And Sean, any experience from your perspective in Costa in China?
I think more in our setting, and probably similar to other coffee companies, it's more been the removal of the eat-in option, and therefore selling many more drinks in takeaway cups, which are always a focus around environment and sustainability, and also the decision that most coffee companies made to stop accepting reusable cups as well. So that's a couple of areas that, you know, we did pick up on that sustainability argument from, and looking to get back to accepting reusables as soon as we can.
Right. Well, thank you to everyone for sharing your insights and perspectives. We covered quite a lot of ground in a short period of time, but some really useful insights, both kind of what's happening here and now in the UK, other parts of the world, and key things for us to think about as we remobilise the hospitality industry in the UK. Unfortunately, Catherine couldn't join to have some technical issues, but some fantastic ideas and insights. We'll find a way of sharing that with the audience at a later stage. But just before we join up, just 30 seconds from each panelist, please. Just any closing thoughts or remarks or anything you want to leave the audience with, that would be great. And we'll start with Neil Chapman, if that's okay.
Thanks, Carl. I guess I would just reiterate a lot of what we heard today, which is, you know, we're in this kind of new normal. A lot of how the landscape lays is now really clear, but I think we still really need to be agile and adapt as we continue to come out of lockdown and see wider businesses reopen. Which you need to continue to adapt and take some of those learnings that we've had today to the guest experience.
Thanks, Neil. And to Sean?
I think, yeah, echoing that partly. I mean, as we're all learning together about how to deal with the virus. just things change rapidly, so emphasising the importance of remaining agile. What was a sound decision yesterday might need to be looked at again tomorrow if the Prime Minister stands up behind his lectern and says, from tomorrow, we think, right, what's coming next? So yeah, it's just that the agility and ability to adapt and do things for the right reasons, and appreciate that you might need to rethink it.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, John. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it. And to Robin?
Yeah, I think the underlying piece from me is really around confidence, and driving confidence in your employees that they've got a safe place of work to return to, confidence in your customers that they can come and enjoy a safe experience with you, and then ultimately looking back of house, confidence in your supply chain and the products that you're investing in, and making sure that you've got the right suppliers supporting you.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thanks for joining us. Some great insights today. And Talia, you're on mute.
I think reinforce what Robin said there about the confidence part, confidence in your supply chain and your partners and the quality of your product. But ultimately, the focus is to reignite the hospitality sector for all of us here. And we need to continue with that, what I mentioned earlier, in terms of this flexibility, being more flexible, constantly reviewing, reacting and adapting accordingly. And also collaboration, more of this, Carl, I think we need to do as an industry and as a sector to get us all back up and running again.
Totally agree. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And finally, Craig.
Yeah, I think some great points, Leanne. I think collaboration. I think we have a collective responsibility, and certainly a collective responsibility to move the industry forward together. Because if we don't do it and entice people back into our business and all of your businesses, then the world will be a sadder place.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for joining us today. Much appreciated. Finally, a massive thank you to, again, all our panelists. Thank you to people that have dialed in. Hope that was insightful and you've got some good perspectives to take away. The video will be shared in due course on LinkedIn, and we'll be doing another webinar in about 2 weeks' time, so a series of these. So please look out on our LinkedIn page. Thanks again for joining us, and take care and speak soon.
Thank you.